What's going on, everyone? We are here at the Rapala booth with Mr. Jacob Wheeler. You all know him, guys. This is probably one of the most looked forward to baits of 2024, 2025. The Mooch Minnow. Jacob, tell us a little bit about that guy right there.
So the first thing you're going to notice is his super TPE, okay? So he's got that stretchy material. He floats really well. It's going to be great for a drop shot, great for actually a Ned head. Really good little Ned head bait because he casts. But the key with this whole bait, for me, really came down to the tab on the end. You know, fluke style baits or minnow style baits are nothing new, but trying to reinvent the wheel. You can't go too far off base, but there's little subtleties in bass fishing right now that you need. So for me, I wanted a bait that I could put on a jig head, of course, with a crazy forward-facing sonar that I can catch these fish that are on smaller bait. Obviously, the freeloader last year is a little bit bigger profile.
Had a good roll as well.
Yeah, and had a good roll, and this bait does the same. So if I want the roll, but I wanted a secondary action, so if I put like a tungsten jig head, like the VMC tungsten jig heads that just came out, it has a good roll, but in the back, the high frequency of this tail, it's not like a swim bait tail. It doesn't have this big kick. It has a really high frequency of kick, and if you look at a shad swim, he swims real tight. It's high frequency. And everything in nature swims, for the most part, fairly tight kicks.
Absolutely. They're just using the back part of their tail. They're not using their whole body. You see some of those bigger swim baits, they're fully swimming. It's not natural.
Yeah, and so like when you're really, when you're using a smaller minnow profile shape, you're trying to imitate that shad, and then and like now we see how fish react with our bait more than ever before. That was the reason why we're gonna have secondary action there. But in addition to this, so say they don't like the tail, or say there's that action of the day, it has a little bit like, all I do is I'll cut those tabs off when then I have more rolling action. Sort of like very similar to a freeloader. I have a lot of rolling action in and of itself, but if I want a more exaggerated rolling action and I'm shaking a minnow, like this guy right here, I can just cut those off and get it more exaggerated.
Yeah, now I get a lot of questions at the store. When you're running, I know you ran the hybrid jig heads for a while, the regular lead heads. Now you've got the tungsten version. I get a lot of questions of, does the lead sink slower than the tungsten just because tungsten's more dense? How do you compare those weights when you switch over from one to the other?
So I personally, that's the fact, okay? I actually don't think, so you hear like, I think tungsten's awesome if you want a smaller profile. The problem with like the great thing about tungsten is you're matching up. If you're throwing a half-ounce head, you're matching it. You got a giant lead head on the front, where a smaller lead is going to make it look more natural, right? You're trying to get that bait down there in 30 feet. A lot of times those fish are out there suspended on something. You're going to need that head to match up. A quarter, I might not be worried about a quarter and going to a tungsten. I might do a quarter ounce with with lead. So it's just all depending on what you're looking for. But I will say one thing. I think that lead, like overall, I don't think it necessarily sinks faster. I think the larger the overall profile of the head, the better you're gonna be able to see that on your electronics. So you hear about, I think density-wise, like you hear a little bit about like forward-facing sonar, like a lead head versus a tungsten head. Tungsten you can see better because it's denser. I think it's actually the opposite. I think the larger it is, the more you can see it.
Absolutely. I mean, your forward-facing sonar, you use Lowrance Active Target 2, correct? Now, when it comes to bouncing off, and I love forward-facing sonar, pinging a minnow, that's what I like to do. When it comes to that frequency, we're still picking up bass. They're not hard. So, I mean, you're still getting a good return, and I definitely agree with what you just said about having that bigger profile bouncing back at that.
And I think the other thing is like with that, like a minnow profile, like this is like underutilized shallow. Like I think people don't really know like where this is gonna go. Like, you think of a lipless crankbait. The one thing that people, like they look at these baits and are like, oh, this is only driven by forward-facing. No, listen, I've caught them in a foot of water on a trap school. I found on a trap, throw a freeloader, throw a Mooch Minnow and catch them every single cast. It's the action, it's the profile, it generates bites, and it does it all over the country. No matter what you're fishing for, largemouth, smallmouth, spotted bass, what species you're targeting, crappie, white bass, it doesn't matter. It just generates bites. It's the profile that will never stop catching fish.
Just a minnow, that's all they eat.
They eat minnows, they eat shad.
Now, I know some of your other plastics here, they've got some more scents. Do you have a specific scent that you went with on any other plastics?
So scent-wise, we have one signature scent across the whole line. That's what we did. The big thing was I'm big on scent, and I was like, I've always added scent as well. Now listen, I was always skeptical, actually, scent-wise. I've always been the skeptic.
We'll see you over at the bait pop booth too.
Yes, and I was always skeptic on that, and then like that aspect of it, I'm like, man, but as we're able to learn more of how fish react and interact with our baits, you realize how much they actually look at it and analyze things and pay attention to little subtleties. So to me, scent, one more thing that adds, if I get 2 more bites in a day or a bite more a day because I'm adding scent to my baits, I feel like it's important. So now there's a lot of different ways to look at that, but to me, I think scent is important, and having those out of the package ready to roll with a signature scent is definitely an important part of it.
Kind of smells like anus oil to me.
It might have a little bit of that, maybe a little bit. Maybe a little bit. He's got a little combo. He might have a little Anderson, but he's not all that.
Hey, that was one of my favorite clips of all time.
I know. The anus. I was like, oh my gosh.
DC.
It was crazy. I'm like, this guy. Freaking.
Hey man, I appreciate it. Thank you for your time. We'll be going back through here looking at some other baits.
Man. Thank you so much.
Thank you guys.